All right, welcome back to part 3 of our 4-part series on theology of the body. I'm joined, as I was the first 2 times, by Bill Donaghy, Patricia, Lara Smith, and her husband, Connor Smith. And I will not give the lengthy bios for their introduction because I've done those previously. So I advise you to go back and listen to the previous episodes that give kind of a foundation to some of the things that we're going to talk about today. But I'm excited to be joined by all of them in this discussion of theology of the body as we continue our exploration, really, we're just scratching the surface of this amazing corpus of teaching in the theology of the body, and there's so much more. And at the end of this, I'll ask them on where we can go for more resources if we want to explore more, and I hope you do, and I encourage you to do that. I also want to include a disclaimer or an advisory to parents, I should say, at the beginning of this episode, because we're going to be diving into some more specific teachings on sexual intimacy and conjugal union. And I want to include an advisory to parents in case you're listening to this with little ones around. You may not want to for this episode. It's completely your prerogative, of course. But I mention this not because sex and sexual intimacy is somehow dirty or inappropriate or something to be afraid of or to hide, but rather because it is the prerogative of parents to know and to choose when to teach their children about that. It's not my prerogative, of course. So we're gonna dive into those things. There's so much wonderful things to talk about, so many wonderful things to talk about with respect to sexual intimacy, which is why we're going to. And it forms obviously a core part of the teaching of the theology of the body, because as Bill mentioned in I think our first episode on this, so much of this is about sex and about how our sexual identity informs who we are as children of God. So to understand that, we have to talk about sexual intimacy and conjugal union, and we're going to do that today. But I wanted to give that disclaimer to parents up front. And with that, let me welcome Bill and Patricia and Connor back to Creedal Catholic. Welcome, guys.
Good to be with you, Zach. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, absolutely. I am also excited to dive in here, and I'm going to do what we did before and read several of the summaries of audiences that I received from Patricia. So Patricia's been studying the theology of the body for several years, has gone through each of the audiences in painstaking detail and written these one-sentence summaries for herself, I think, to sort of better capture what each is about. And so I've borrowed those from her. I'm looking at audiences 20 to 23 today. That's what we're going to talk about. And a lot of these do focus, like I said, on conjugal union. And so I'm going to read these one-sentence summaries for 4 of those, 20 to 23, and then we'll just dive into some questions on them. So statement number 1, sentence number 1 on audience 20 is, although the Semitic language lacked varied expressions by defining conjugal union as knowledge, this word, knowledge, yet conveys depth of meaning as man and woman are given and indeed reciprocally experienced in each's concretely defined and unique fullness of identity in conjugal union. There's a ton there, but we're gonna unpack it. Audience 21, knowing the body's power to create human life and transmit God's image and likeness in conjugal union is mutual self-realization in the both unique and joint roles of motherhood and fatherhood. Audience 22, knowledge through mutual self-realization and life generation is stronger than death, as man and woman continue to unite and transmit God's image and likeness even in the face of death, sin, and the fall. And audience 23, the theology of the body is knowing the human person in an integrated fashion, our identity and understanding rooted in the beginning, which withstand time, culture, and context. Now, there's a lot there. I want to focus in first on this word knowledge that we talked about, right? So when I was reading this, I was thinking particularly of what John Paul II talks about, which is the Genesis account, which uses knowledge to describe the sexual act, right? So in Genesis, for example, Adam knew his wife Eve. So when we talk about this biblical language of knowledge, I'll throw this question to you first, Bill. How does the word knowledge shed light on conjugal union itself? How does knowledge help us understand the sexual act?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I love these audiences because they're giving us the opportunity to reclaim and regain the fullness of words like knowledge. For us moderns, we hear knowledge or to know, and we go right into this cerebral zone. And it's like, oh yeah, facts, snippets of information, processes. So it's the mechanical kind of knowing. But in the biblical context and in John Paul's thought here, it is so much more expansive. It's full-bodied. It's it's taking in the whole, not a part. And that's the secret of theology of the body, right? That it's this marriage, always a marriage. So knowledge is, and the key word here is experience too, right? Experience. I can study something in a book with my brain, but when I actually encounter the reality of it, it's a whole new level, right? We talk about that often. You can't get it just from books, right? Because that's such a dissecting. So there's so much more to say about knowledge, but I'll just pause right there if Connor and Patricia want to chime in.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Bill, for that foundation. And I wanted to also note that John Paul II was saying that it may even seem like a limitation of language in ancient language that, oh, if he's just using, or people might interpret it, John Paul II is just using one, or that in Hebrew it's just being used as one word for different meanings, and it was just very limited. But actually, as Bill said, forming one flesh is really the deepest knowledge that people could have of each other. And so there's this really concrete revelation of each other in more than just physical, but spiritual and beyond.
Yeah, great points all. I'm thinking about when I was a teenager, maybe even a preteen, right? And when I would read that passage in Genesis, it struck me as almost a euphemism, right? And so I remember like reading it in youth group, and you'd read in Adam knew his wife Eve, and there'd be a little chuckle, right? Or you'd use that euphemism yourself, and say like to know in the biblical sense. And I think that is getting at what John Paul II was talking about that you just mentioned, Patricia, like that we sometimes think this is just like a sort of shorthand due to linguistic limitation, rather than no, this is actually showing us what it means to truly know someone, right? And Bill, I liked your distinction about just sort of book knowledge or just data. And I think in this case, maybe thinking about pornography and what John Paul II said about pornography is helpful, because one of the things that I have found most incredible to define sort of the ills of pornography is John Paul II's statement that the problem is not that it reveals too much, but that it reveals too little. And I was listening to a podcast on Matt Fradd's Pints with Aquinas show where he contrasted pornography and iconography. And he interviewed Jonathan Pageau, the Orthodox iconographer, to talk about this. And he was saying, pornography, it is, we think it's like revealing a whole lot. We think that the problem with it is that it shows everything, but actually it conceals so much of the human person. Iconography, obviously in iconography, all the characters are totally clothed, and in that sense, sort of on one level concealed, but the intent of iconography is actually to reveal the true nature of things. And so I was thinking about that as you both were talking, Bill and Patricia, because I think that helps us understand what true knowledge is. True knowledge then means the human person. And so that helps us understand then what sexual intimacy is all about. But go ahead and jump in here, Bill.
Sure. Yeah. This one word knowledge we could riff off of for another 20 minutes. I'm just thinking right now of Joseph Pieper, the German theologian. He wrote a great book called Leisure, the Basis of Culture. Amazing book. And he talks about how the medievals looked at the word knowledge, and they had two words, ratio and intellectus. And I'll just take a minute here because it's so powerful. We come to know a thing through both of these means. Ratio is sort of the reason. It's I am analyzing, dissecting, diving in, researching. It's kind of the masculine, the ratio, right, of research and reason. But the intellectus is the way to know by receiving. So it's almost more feminine. It's like, let the data speak, let the reality wash over me, and let me experience this thing. And John Paul says so much about intellectus, phenomenology, experience of reality as a way to know. We can come to know. Those two words are always moving together. It's not like we can get rid of ratio because intellectus is better. It's like Martha and Mary, right? Both are saints. One's sort of the active icon. One's the interior life icon, but we need both. So I just wanted to put that out there. It's kind of an important thing to keep in mind. And of course, as Mary chose the better part, intellectus is the better part. Why? Because as creatures of God, we are primarily receptive. It's all gift. And so Adam's knowing his wife Eve is another way of saying she is a gift to me, and I become a gift for her. And then, well, we'll get to the rest of the audiences here, but that's where the magic happens, right? When they recognize gift.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And that ties into what we're going to talk about, I think, with this mutual self-realization idea that I want to get to. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit more about this language of an integrated fashion. So we've talked a little bit about knowledge, of course, like you said, Bill, we could riff on it for forever. And I think it'll keep coming up, and we'll keep sort of elaborating on it as we discuss this. But the other phrase there that caught my eye in John Paul II's work is in an integrated fashion. So Patricia and Connor, I'll turn this to you guys next. What do we mean when we say in integrated fashion? So we've talked about how conjugal union, sexual intimacy enables husband and wife to know each other. But what does it mean to know in an integrated fashion?
Sure. So we've already started to touch upon it in the first question, because I do agree that it is understanding beyond the body, so body and soul, and we might also add heart and mind. And I think that it means giving and receiving as a whole, so not just one part or parts of them, as Bill, I believe, hinted earlier, and really perceiving the human person as a gift with a unique dignity of being made in the image and likeness of God. So it's so much bigger than just this is your body or this is a physical aspect of you, but I am giving and receiving from the image and likeness of God, which is so far beyond.
That makes sense. And it makes me think of the pornography comment from John Paul II, right? Because pornography is not helping you understand the subject in an integrated fashion at all. It's showing you literally one dimension of the subject. I guess not literally. Literally, it's a two-dimensional picture or image or whatever, but it is showing you only one dimension, showing you the person's body. And that is the opposite of knowing them in an integrated fashion, because you're not knowing their soul. You're not seeing them as a human person. You're seeing them as an object, and not only an object, but that you're seeing them as an object that becomes an object of pleasure, because their representation, their likeness is in an image or a video or whatever that ends up being used and utilized by you for your own pleasure. So that makes sense. Bill, anything to add on the integrated person front?
I'm just thinking of the Genesis account here of the first words of Adam when he beholds Eve. And to press into this, right? He says, "Here at last is bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh." And that's so powerful for our age to hear, because we vacillate, we swing the pendulum back and forth so much between just like angelism and animalism, this Manichaean demon we're going to talk about a little bit more later. But it's so important that he says, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, because the person is the embodied person. So it's the integration of body and spirit. This is how I encounter the other person. So he doesn't say like, here is thought of my thought or spirit of my spirit. To say, flesh is to say, as a human person, is to say this dance, this combination, this composite of both, this integration of both, and that to encounter that totality of the human person is what brings the wonder. In those beginning audiences, John Paul says that Adam and Eve could see and know each other. There's the word know again, with all the peace of the interior gaze. So Adam doesn't stop at the flesh, like, wow, look at this woman, but rather lets the integration of her spirit flowing through, like her body manifests her personality. He sees everything, and they're naked without shame. So, boy, do we need to get back to that. It's good that we're bringing in the pornography thing. This pornographic vision is such a ripping apart that misses so much, but integration is the restoration.
I was just going to add to that, to say, when I was just thinking while he was speaking, that when he said it's not thought of my thought or mind of my mind, but flesh of my flesh, that it also shows that we were really intended to have these bodies, and this was what makes us uniquely human, and it is part of our identity. And it's not because obviously they're angels or other spirits, but this is who we are as human beings.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit more about the sexual intimacy itself, the act of conjugal union, sex between husband and wife. Now, the conclusion of that is procreation, right? Having children. And I obviously prefer the procreation, as does the entire Catholic tradition, to the term reproduction, because reproduction implies this very sort of mechanistic or purely biological process, right? Where it's just a sperm meets an egg, and then you have a zygote, and eventually it grows. It's not a person, of course, until it's born, right? And until it's born, it's just a collection of cells in more or less advanced stages that we call a fetus, et cetera. I mean, that's sort of the modern view of it. The Christian view, what we obviously hold to be the correct view, is that this is procreation. So, Patricia, as the life sciences consultant, I'll throw this to you first. But why is procreation a better term for describing this than reproduction, perhaps in addition to what I just outlined?
Yes. So it is interesting because you're asking as a life science consultant, but of course, I think in our understanding, we're going to take it beyond just the, as you said, just the mechanical or biological. Right. So it's kind of an irony. But as you mentioned, yes, procreation is reproduction. And I would say that it is part of the consummation and the total acknowledgement of the whole human person and everything our bodies have to offer. So I guess in that sense, that's really good, because people will say, yes, we have this capability and that is natural. And obviously we see it, it's tangible. And you don't have to have, I guess, in the background sense of your question, a knowledge of the spiritual to say we have these capabilities. But yes, so especially the generation of life. But where I was going to go immediately beyond that is that it is really also a mystery, and I would even say like mystery, capital M, I would say, where it is the active participation in divine mystery as creators. It is active participation, once again, in our image and likeness of God and of the Trinity.
Bill, anything to add on that front? Because I'm thinking about, on Patricia's point about mystery, I'm thinking about how, we've just had our fourth child, and every time we go through this process, it's amazing how much the doctors don't know about what's going on, right? They have all their monitors, they can see what's going on, they can track baby's development to a large degree, but there's so much that's going on in the development of the baby, especially in the early stages when you can't hear a heartbeat and see what's going on. There's so much that we don't know. So anything to add to Patricia's point about mystery there?
Oh my gosh, there's always something to add. This is we need like 5-hour sessions. There's so many things happening here. In John Paul's letter to families, he has this amazing, I don't know if it's section 17 or 19 or something, where he talks about the modern world cannot take mystery, just can't like relate to it or comprehend it or unpack it. And so it stays at that level of the mechanical processes, what you're kind of laying out, and the idea of reproduction and the biological only. And it really is so frustrating. We go back to Genesis, and I think it's Genesis 4, when the first act of this procreation happens. What does Eve say? I have begotten a son or something with the help of the Lord. So like immediately from the very beginning, there's this, okay, I'm contributing the biological material here, so to speak, sperm meets egg, but man, something else is going on here. And I know with the birth of every new child, it's like there's some mystery here, and the personality develops over time. And I'm like, wow, you are not me. You're not a carbon copy of me or my wife, but you are unique and unrepeatable. So personhood slips in here. And it's a whole new level, right? It's this kind of transcendence, this mystery of the other, and we're the only beings like this in the visible universe. This is what we're fighting for. Like, this is what the church is fighting for, the sanctity of this procreative power. Yeah, we don't reproduce, we don't mate in that language, but we procreate. And the word create is so awesome, right? Create. When you hear create, you think of artist, right? An artist creates. There's a great line in scripture that says, like, we are God's poema. We are his poetry. We are God's art. And procreation is like we get to enter into that art and become a master, like make a masterpiece. It's just when you get this, everything changes. I just can't, I don't look at things the same. I don't look with this one eye open scientific reductionism. It's just a breath of mystery comes in and everything's different. That's what the theology of the body is communicating to the world, I think, right? That it's present. Okay, Patricia, I see she's like, see, we can't stop talking about this, Zach.
Yes,
Patricia.
this is so exciting. And now we're getting into a little bit more of my life science background because I have things more to say. So I completely agree with all of these things about the mystery and the things that we can't explain, or everything is different. Every person is different. Every pregnancy is different. And every stage of pregnancy is different. But the unfortunate thing where we do actually have the science, and there is a lot of study from it, but it's not popular, unfortunately, is just even sometimes understanding of fertility, or the understanding I guess maybe from the Catholic perspective, or in the worlds in which I have lived in, I know that there is a lot of science, or a lot of doctors, or even, I guess, nonprofits who study these things in depth, but it's not mainstream, where it's not in medical school, for example, to understand hormones and how they actually impact the body, like, holistically. So just even as an example, with contraception and all of these ideas where we've talked about compartmentalization, it's so unfortunate that we'll isolate and say, okay, here's your sexual organs, and here are your hormones that help in reproduction. Let's suppress those, but it's not a holistic view, and I don't know why. And it's so unfortunate that it's so ignored, and to the detriment of the actual body and to patients, unfortunately, who are under care, where it will impact the rest of the body. I mean, that's just a small example, and I can go, or maybe it's a big example, and I can go to so many others. But that it's just not taught to treat the body holistically, at least when treating in terms of sexual health.
I think that's a good point. And something we've been kind of dancing around. Sometimes when I talk to other people about these ideas, they hear things like, like holistic health, or, being integrated. And the response is, well, that does sound really nice, but what's wrong with just giving part of a good to somebody else? What's wrong with just, if sex is good like you say it is, why can't I just give this to one person and then give it to another person? Like, maybe I'm not giving, all of myself to that person, but is that really so bad? And I think we've kind of brought up in this discussion why failing to do that does in fact have real consequences. Patricia, you had brought up, at least in actual medicine, right, where you might be prescribed contraceptives, but not really understand how that impacts the rest of your body. It's like my sole focus is resolving this one, what they would consider issue with it, and not really focus on anything else to the detriment of health. And then, of course, there's all the interpersonal problems and spiritual problems that can kind of crop up from not really viewing somebody else as a gift, rather just some part of it to be transacted from one reason or another.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Connor, because that ties into the next question I was going to ask. So you were just talking about viewing someone else as a gift, receiving their whole person. John Paul II talks about this a lot when he uses the phrase mutual self-realization. And there's a lot to unpack there, and we have to sort of I want to talk about what exactly he means by that. But in doing so, I also wonder if we can just briefly, and I do mean briefly because we have about 5 minutes left in this episode, but I want to talk very briefly, just touch on the church's teaching on contraception, because this is one of the least popular teachings outside of the church, and yet one of the teachings that the church has to hold the line on the most in our modern day and age, because it flies in the face of our modern individualistic, autonomous, sexual culture. So, Bill, I'll throw this to you first. When we talk about mutual self-realization, what do we mean? And how does that giving of oneself totally as gift inform our teachings, our church's teachings, our beliefs on whether or not we can use artificial contraception in marriage?
Okay, you just offered me like a thesis statement for a doctoral.
I know. I'm so sorry. Yeah, since I'm guessing that you teach on these things quite a bit at the Theology of the Body Institute. So give me your best kind of bumper sticker answer here.
Yeah. So mutual self-realization. Gosh, what a theme here. I think our culture is a bit obsessed with self-realization today in one vein, right? Like finding myself, knowing myself, self. Like we've kind of gone overboard with this pursuit of self-realization. And here's the thing with theology of the body. John Paul II so often speaks of, we find ourselves through the sincere gift of ourselves. And in theology of the body, he talks about man is not fully the image of God in his solitude, but in communion. Right? So let us make man in our image, after our likeness, male and female, he created them. So mutual self-realization is that return to God's original plan. The two shall become one flesh. That isn't just a biological thing, so you have to get married and experience sexual intimacy to experience the fullness of human life. No, that's not it. That's the trap of only the biological. The Lord is revealing to us he's a mystery of communion. Okay, there's mutual self-realization in the Trinity from all eternity. Father, Son, and Spirit, a communion of persons. And so mutual self-realization for us humans happens when we enter the dance of communion, when we give ourselves and then we find ourselves. So the sad pursuit of self-fulfillment and realization here on earth right now, we gotta find it in the other. John Paul says this is under mutual self-realization. Masculinity and femininity complete and explain each other. Okay, and that isn't just biological. That the celibate, the single person, the consecrated soul, also enters this dance of the masculine and the feminine, the giving and the receiving. I'm made for relationship, and I find myself in that mystery. There's a great song. Sorry, I'm hogging up on this question here, but Ben Platt has a great song, "Grow as We Go," I believe it's called. And it's so neat because he starts it off with, you say you want to find yourself and you need to go. But, I think I got to go with you. We're going to grow as we go. You ebb and I flow. It's a beautiful song. It's the highs and lows. Let's do this together. I think that's what we're supposed to do. That's what mutual self-realization is. When we isolate ourselves from another, bad news.
Yes. So I do completely agree with Bill, and especially in the sense in marriage or outside of marriage, this need for union, and this is how we are, and definitely fulfilled by it. And then I was just going to bring it back a little bit to Zach's question specifically about contraception, where if we say that we're denying really each other's fertility, that's already one, it's not mutual, and it's also really denying the realization, the full realization of oneself. If you say, actually, this is a capability, it's actually really sad, because this is a gift, this is an amazing power, this is a mystery that you have, but I don't want that. And yeah, that's really the opposite of mutual self-realization.
And I'm thinking here about what Connor said about why we can't just give a partial good to someone, right? And I think the response to what you just said, Patricia, could be, why is it bad if we both agree to withhold, right? Like if we both say we don't want kids, we can both come to this, it's not holding back if we both say we come to this conclusion together. But the response there, at least one of the responses, and you guys could probably do a better job at this than I could, would be, right, it doesn't matter if you've both agreed to withhold, you're still withholding, right? This is still a mystery, and you're not fully knowing each other as embodied souls if you are withholding a crucial part, perhaps the most crucial part of the marital act, right? You're sort of only emphasizing the bodily aspect of it and not the ensoulment aspect of the sexual act.
Yes, so I was just going to add to that really quickly, that really going again back to the church's teaching that marriage should be free, or freely given and unitive and procreative.
I know we're getting to the end of this, so yeah, I'll do a microwave answer here too. I have another song in my head, the John Legend song from a number of years ago, "All of Me," which went crazy viral. People love that song. All of me loves all of you. If you throw contraception in there, it's like, some of me loves some of you. Imagine that song rewritten to say this part I like, but I don't really like that part of you, or I don't want that part of you. That song would have tanked, right? What? Who says that? So there's something in us that yearns for the total gift of self. And any compromise, and contraception is a compromise, withers the human experience and the human person and does not give us total communion. Now, we can talk about sensitivity and tenderness. We don't have time right now to do that. Why people contracept. Sometimes they might have a good intention, but yeah, anybody who says some of me loves some of you, check in 5 years later, 10 years later in that marriage, and it's like, oh man, if you don't give your whole self, it's not going to work. It's not going to work.
You know, I'm reminded of a friend of mine who's actually my son's godfather. He's a doctor, very devout Catholic, and he was telling me once that he saw this condom commercial, and the condom commercial was advertising what a great condom this was because it was, you know, it was almost like nothing was there, right? It was like so you couldn't even notice, right? And his point was like they get it, like they know they get it, but they're not connecting the dots, right? Because like that's what the human person wants, is to be fully united. We don't want to have anything intervening in that process to prevent us from giving each other all of ourselves. So I think that was, you know, it's an example of, you know, kind of out of the mouths of babes, right? Or like the high priest Caiaphas speaking the truth accidentally. Like this is known. I think people recognize this, at least intuitively. But that's a great discussion, and we'll end there for part 3. We're going to talk about some of these ideas about Manichaeism and Gnosticism. And as a little preview, I'm going to hit on something that, Bill, you mentioned, John Paul's letter to families. I looked it up while you were talking. I found that it's section 19 where he talks about this great mystery and sort of avoiding falling into the mechanistic trap. But he also says, as a teaser for next time, within a similar anthropological perspective, the human family is facing the challenge of a new Manichaeanism in which body and spirit are put in radical opposition. The body does not receive life from the spirit, and the spirit does not give life to the body. So with that little teaser, I'll end us here, and we'll look forward to part 4, where we'll kind of wrap up this sort of foundation of the Theology of the Body course. And then next time I'll ask Bill and Patricia and Connor for some advice on resources for further learning and education. In the meantime, if you want to reach out to Patricia and Connor, you can feel free to send me a note at zach@credocatholic.com. I'd be happy to put you in touch. And Bill does this stuff for a living and loves engaging with people on these questions. So his email is Donaghy, DONAGHY, at tobinstitute.org for Theology of the Body Institute.org. So Donaghy at tobinstitute.org. Bill, Patricia, and Connor, thank you so much for joining me. I'm excited for our next and last conversation.